Welcome back to Book on a Shelf. This is the channel where we give you that intellectual shortcut, really digging deep into the nonfiction works that shape how we see history and science. Today we're immersing ourselves, really getting into the source material provided by Margot Lee Shetterly's, essential work, Hidden Figures, the American Dream and the Untold Story of the Black women mathematicians who helped win the space race. And this isn't just, a popular history recap. It's more analysis of how genius, sheer necessity, and profound institutional repression all kind of collided right at the peak of the Cold War. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Our mission today is to dissect Shetterly's central argument, which is, frankly, profound. It's that African-American female mathematicians, specifically Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, weren't just, helpful participants. No, they were strategically, computationally essential for the United States to actually secure its victories in the space race. They were in many ways the key to national triumph. But, and this is crucial, they did this vital work while being subjected to intense systemic discrimination.
Multi-layered, based on both race and gender.
Precisely. And our goal here isn't simply to, list off biographies, though these women were incredible. It's really to conduct an analytical deep dive. We want to understand the profound operational impact of their roles inside the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory. That's the place that became the core of NASA, right? We need to grasp the structural mechanics. How could their work be so vital, yet their personal, highly technical achievements remain almost entirely obscured from the historical record for decades? It's quite something.
Yeah, and this analysis means we have to see them not just as symbols of resilience, which they absolutely were, but also as elite technical personnel. Their specific skills fundamentally shifted the trajectory of American aerospace development.
Okay, so to really get the scope of what they achieved, we absolutely have to set the scene first. The operating environment. We're talking about mid-20th century America. This was the era of Jim Crow laws, especially in the American South, which is exactly where Langley was located, in Virginia. So segregation wasn't just social custom, it was rigidly enforced law. And it permeated every institution, even federal ones like Langley. At the same time, you had this deeply, deeply entrenched gender bias, the whole idea of women holding positions of technical authority, especially in fields considered so critical, so high stakes, like aerodynamics, rocketry. Well, it was highly controversial, to put it mildly.
Yeah, controversial is putting it mild.
So Langley operated within this dual repressive framework. The institution was fundamentally reluctant, you could say, to hire African Americans at all, and certainly reluctant to entrust high-level mathematical or, heaven forbid, engineering roles to women of any race.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Like you said, the necessity angle. We're talking the early 1940s, then into the 50s. You've got World War II, then the Cold War ramping up, intense competition with the Soviet Union, and critical labor shortage, particularly in technical fields. Suddenly, the U.S. government had this astronomical need for calculation. Yeah. Precise, fast, repeatable mathematical calculations. First for wartime efforts, ballistics, aerodynamics for planes, and then boom, the space race escalates things exponentially.
Exactly. The technical demand just exploded. It became so overwhelming. It created this pressure, this necessity that maybe just for a moment began to override the ingrained institutional bias. The laboratory was desperate for brain power. They needed people, skilled people, to manage this flood of data coming from wind tunnels, from new aircraft designs, early rocket tests.
The Zeta deluge.
Totally. And this necessity, this kind of strategic labor vacuum, that's what essentially forced Langley's hand. They reluctantly opened the door, just a crack, to African-American female applicants, specifically for this new role they created, the human computer.
Right, the human computer. And this leads to such a critical insight from Shetterly's research about their qualifications, because the source material is incredibly clear on this point. These women weren't hired as some kind of, social experiment or out of pity.
Not at all.
They were frankly overqualified. Shetterly states it definitively. The African-American female applicants came with more experience than the white women applicants.
That's a direct quote, and it's powerful. It often meant they held advanced degrees in mathematics or physics. Many had prior experience as teachers, particularly math teachers. Teaching was one of the few professional avenues readily open to educated Black women at the time. So they came in with the rigor, the educational background, the experience to execute complex calculations from day one.
So they basically forced the institution's hand through sheer competence, even if the institution refused to recognize their equality as people.
That's a great way to put it. Their skills were undeniable.
Such a vital distinction. They weren't coming in green. They were established, high-caliber experts being slotted into a job title that sounds, well, dismissive now. Let's maybe touch on the three key figures Shetterly focuses on and their initial roles within that computer framework.
Okay. Dorothy Vaughan is a key starting point. She began as a computer, yes, but almost immediately her leadership qualities shone through. She had this organizational skill, this acumen that led her to effectively supervise the West Area computers that was the segregated unit where the black women worked.
So she was essentially managing, mentoring.
Long before she ever got the official title or the recognition for it. Absolutely.
Mary Jackson.
Mary Jackson had a strong background in math and physics. Her focus shifted towards aerodynamics. She eventually fought, and it was a fight to transition into an actual engineering role. She did pioneering work related to the supersonic pressure tunnel. Her whole career path really highlights this relentless battle against the institutional walls, trying to keep computers and engineers rigidly separate, especially based on race and gender.
And then, of course, Katherine Johnson.
Yes, Katherine Johnson. Perhaps the most famous now, thanks to the movie as well. Her incredible mathematical mind was just perfectly honed for calculating complex trajectories. Flight paths. Her early roles involved solving really tough, high-stakes problems, things related to aircraft flight paths, atmospheric variables, stuff that directly laid the groundwork for her later absolutely critical work on orbital mechanics for the space program.
So that initial label, human computer, while it was an official job title, acknowledging they performed calculations, it was also, as Shetterly shows, the primary mechanism the organization used to systemically dismiss their individual intellectual achievements, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It reduced them to sort of highly accurate cogs in a larger machine, which conveniently set the stage for denying them credit later on.
Okay, so when we talk about their day-to-day reality, we really have to analyze the profound impact of what's often called the double burden, this intersection of racial segregation and gender repression. They weren't separate issues for these women. They compounded each other daily. It must have created almost impossible professional hurdles.
Oh, completely. The racial separation was immediate. It was absolute. And it seemed designed, frankly, to minimize their very presence. Shetterly documents this so well. Dorothy Vaughan's experience arriving at Langley. The shock of realizing that even employee housing, at a federal facility, mind you, was strictly segregated by race. And the justification given. Allegedly, it was to avoid embarrassment. Whose embarrassment, you have to ask?
Right. It wasn't just bureaucratic inertia. It was an active institutional choice. Treating your own highly skilled employees as a social problem that needs to be, what, geographically contained? Managed.
Exactly. And this segregation wasn't just about housing. It followed them everywhere inside the laboratory gates. The book meticulously integrates these witness accounts, detailing the constant grinding humiliation, things like having to use a separate colored washroom.
Which often meant walking halfway across the campus.
Yes, and taking different buses than their white colleagues, or eating at separate tables in the cafeteria. Shetterly cites these specific examples.
Just try to imagine the psychological load of that. The cognitive dissonance must have been staggering. One minute, you're applying advanced calculus, maybe differential geometry, to figure out the trajectory for a spacecraft going to the moon, literally holding the fate of astronauts and a massive federal program in your mind.
High stakes.
And the next minute, you're being forced to walk across campus to use a substandard restroom or find a specific water fountain simply because of the color of your skin. The message being sent was just brutal. Your brain is invaluable to us, but you, as a person, you're somehow lesser or problematic.
Yeah. It's incredibly stark when you put it like that. And beyond those racial hurdles, the gender oppression acted like this constant glass ceiling on their professional growth, even when their competence was undeniable, proven time and again. The structure was set up to keep the women intentionally in the background. Shetterly uses the phrase, they were there to perform the math without being in the public eye.
Out of sight, out of mind, almost.
Essentially, the ultimate control, the final sign-offs, the high-level decision-making meetings, that sphere remained almost exclusively the domain of the white male engineers.
Which ensured that even when the women were the ones doing the heavy lifting intellectually, maybe catching errors, verifying the safety and accuracy of the engineers' designs,
the men often received the public credit and the promotions. This minimization wasn't just abstract either. It hit them in concrete ways, most obviously, their paychecks.
The financial gap.
Yes, their indispensable work largely went uncredited, unnoticed in performance reviews or promotion considerations. And critically, their salaries were consistently, provably lower than the male engineers they were supporting. Often engineers whose work might have been less complex mathematically or more about oversight than the fundamental calculations the women were performing.
So let's connect this back to the bigger picture, especially that job title, computer. You touched on this earlier, but the semantic weight of that label is huge, isn't it?
It really is. This is where Shetterly's analysis gets quite deep into the mechanics of how history gets written, or unwritten. By labeling them computers, the institution effectively abstracted their achievements away from them as individuals. An accomplishment, say, a critical calculation for a flight test, wasn't attributed to Katherine Johnson, the brilliant mathematician. No, it was attributed to the calculation function performed by a computer.
That distinction is so crucial. It's not just an old-fashioned term for someone who computes. It's a built-in mechanism for credit denial. If the success of, say, Project Mercury rests on getting the math right,
Yeah.
and the math was done by a computer,
Then the credit naturally defaults upwards, doesn't it? To the engineer, usually the white man, who requested the calculation or interpreted the output, not to the woman, the black woman, who actually generated the verifiable, mission-critical truth.
wow.
Yeah. It's a semantic reduction that minimizes their individual agency. It ensures their vital contributions could be, well, quite easily erased from the official story, from the historical narrative. It allowed the engineers, the men with the formal titles and the public visibility, to soak up the glory for successful launches or design breakthroughs that were utterly predicated on the women's hidden mathematical labor and verification.
So they were almost intentionally dehumanized by their job title, making the oversight of their contributions a feature of the system, not just some accidental bug.
I think that's a fair assessment based on Shetterly's evidence. It was systemic.
It really is stunning when you read about how, despite these crippling limits, segregated facilities, lower pay, constant credit denial, all of it, these women weren't just, surviving or persevering. They were actively innovating. They found ways to work within that deeply flawed system, but only, it seems, to ensure they could eventually push beyond its restrictive boundaries.
Absolutely. Their determination, often fueled by the sheer necessity of getting the job done right, made them utterly indispensable.
Let's focus maybe a bit more on Katherine Johnson here, just to really illustrate that indispensable role. Her specialty, as you said, was orbital mechanics, projection.
Right. And in the early days of the space program, you have to understand this was uncharted territory mathematically. It was far more complex than, say, calculating the trajectory of an artillery shell. They were moving from relatively simpler ballistic missile trajectories, which are complex, sure, non-linear parabolic paths, but orbital mechanics adds whole new layers.
Like what specifically?
Well, you're dealing with sustained orbits, not just up and down. You need complex differential equations, incredibly precise analytical geometry. You have to calculate the exact launch window, factoring in the Earth's rotation. Then there's the path of the orbit itself, navigating gravitational pulls, and maybe most critically, the precise angle and timing for re-entry into the atmosphere. Get that wrong, and, well, disaster.
And they were doing this by hand.
Initially, yes. Pages and pages of calculations, often under immense pressure, with deadlines tied to launch schedules.
The stakes just couldn't have been higher. And the sources, Shetterly's book, confirmed she was personally responsible for ensuring the success, the safety of the most critical early astronaut launches. The most famous story, of course, is John Glenn's 1962 orbital mission, Friendship 7. Even though NASA had just installed this massive new IBM electronic computer.
State of the art for its time.
Right. Glenn famously distrusted the numbers coming out of this black box. He wasn't going to bet his life on it without confirmation.
And what did he ask for?
He asked the flight director to get the girl, referring to Katherine Johnson, to check the computer's figures. He literally said something like, if she says they're good, then I'm ready to go.
Think about that. The astronaut about to be strapped into a rocket put more trust in her human calculation, her brain, than in the brand new multi-million-dollar machine.
That single anecdote just perfectly encapsulates the level of trust and the recognized precision her work commanded. A trust that actually superseded reliance on the new digital technology.
It's the perfect piece of evidence that their role went far beyond simple calculation. It was about verification, validation, establishing absolute trust in the numbers. They were the ultimate quality control, the human failsafe for the entire incredibly risky space endeavor, and that just completely demolishes the simplistic label of computer. And furthermore, their work wasn't static. It advanced the laboratory's capabilities in really profound ways. Look at Dorothy Vaughan and her team in the West Area Computing Unit. They saw the writing on the wall with the arrival of the IBM machines. They recognized the inevitable shift towards digital computing, but they didn't fight it or become obsolete.
What did they do?
They embraced it head on. They evolved. They transformed themselves from human calculators into pioneering computer programmers. Dorothy Vaughan taught herself Fortran, the main programming language then, and then she taught it to her entire team. They essentially ensured their own relevance, their continued employment.
Wow, that's foresight.
Incredible foresight and adaptability. They didn't just learn to use the machines, they learned to control them. They established NASA's early computer programming protocols. They prepared Langley, and by extension NASA, for the coming digital age.
That is an astonishing pivot. They didn't just passively accept the new tech. They became the instructors, the supervisors of this new electronic era.
Exactly. They went on to supervise other engineers, both male and female, black and white, in programming. They ensured that mathematical equations across multiple departments, multiple projects, were correct, properly calculated, verified. They became the computational backbone, you could say, the ultimate authority on numerical truth within the organization for a crucial period.
So, bringing it all together, the so what moment, as you called it.
Yeah.
What does this all really mean in the context of Shetterly's work?
Well, I think Shetterly's overriding goal, and she achieves it powerfully, is to solidify the historical record, to state irrefutably that these brilliant African-American female minds were the computational engine. They were the highly precise, indispensable brains behind some of the most amazing, most celebrated space discoveries and successful campaigns of the early space race.
And the implication is?
The implication is clear. Without their resilience, their overlooked talent, their absolute precision under pressure, those iconic American triumphs in space simply would not have happened when they did, or perhaps how they did.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. What's really fascinating when you analyze the book itself is how Shetterly constructed this narrative. She grounds the entire thing in what seems like the most reliable methodology possible for this kind of recovery work. A deep reliance on first-hand knowledge and meticulously gathered primary sources.
Yes, and that credibility is absolutely key. It elevates the work. It's not just a historical retelling. It's a powerful piece of documented, corrected history.
And a lot of that credibility seems to stem from her unique personal access, doesn't it? Her family history gave her this sort of built-in infrastructure for the research.
That's right. Her father worked at Langley for decades, from 1964 to 2004 as a climate scientist. So Shetterly grew up around Langley, around the people who worked there. This gave her an authentic, almost intimate understanding of the laboratory environment. Not just what the official archives might say, but, what the hallway conversations sounded like, the culture of the place.
So it's more than just documents.
Much more. That family connection allowed her to kind of bypass some of the formal barriers of official institutional records. Records which, let's be honest, often obscure personal achievements or gloss over institutional biases. Her father was a contemporary. He could describe working conditions with accurate detail. And crucially, he knew these women, or knew people who knew them well. He could introduce Shetterly to the real people, the mentors, the colleagues who became the subjects of the book.
So it gave her access to oral history, to memories that might otherwise have been completely lost.
Precisely. And just as important, Shetterly herself was raised in the same African-American community near Langley in Hampton, Virginia. This gives her an innate understanding of the societal limitations, the specific racial dynamics at play during that era. She understands the expected roles, the unspoken rules within NASA's rigid, segregated structure.
Because she's viewing it through a lens of lived experience, or at least close proximity to it, not just as a detached historian looking back to a vacuum.
Exactly. That perspective is vital for providing the necessary context to their struggles, making it feel authentic.
And her methodology then leaned heavily on interviews, right? The book's prologue really details how expensive those interviews were.
Oh, absolutely. She integrated primary sources through painstaking oral testimonies, collecting witness documents, corroborating stories. This process provides what she calls a genuine angle. It's a unique, insightful glimpse into history that, frankly, no pile of government memos alone could ever capture.
And you really see the strength of that method in the details, the vivid details that stick with you after reading, like the specific accounts of having to use that separate colored washroom, or taking a different bus, or the segregated cafeteria tables we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Those details, rooted in personal testimony, they're the building blocks of her entire argument. They transform abstract concepts like segregation or repression into tangible, visceral, daily realities that these women navigated.
Yeah, it's the difference between reading, say, a dry federal memo that maybe acknowledges a segregated facility exists somewhere on the campus.
And hearing a woman, decades later, describe the indignity, the sheer waste of time and energy of having to walk across that campus just to get a drink of water from the correct fountain, that personal detail is critical.
It is. It ensures the historical record finally acknowledges the human cost of that institutional bias, the lived experience.
So ultimately, this meticulous use of historical witness accounts, of firsthand testimonies, that's really the core strength in the book, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt, it brings this undeniable sense of truth, even urgency, to the nonfiction account. It ensures that the reality of their struggles and the sheer complexity and importance of their achievements are preserved accurately. It's actively correcting a history that, for far too long, really only credited the visible men, the ones in the control room or the press conferences. So, when we step back and assess the book overall, it feels pretty clear that Shetterly is overwhelmingly successful in achieving her main arguments. She successfully stresses the profound, often hidden importance of these women. She's actively correcting that historical injustice by shedding necessary light on the indispensable contributions they made to American aerospace engineering.
Yeah, the arguments really hold water because they aren't based on, speculation or conjecture. They're substantial. They're valid precisely because they are backed up by specific documented historical events. And crucially, by the real stories, the lived experiences of the women themselves. By relying so heavily on those verified witness accounts, Shetterly achieved something more than just documenting history. She actively completed it in a way, filled in the missing pieces.
That's a great way to put it. And the author makes the point, implicitly and explicitly, that these women deserve recognition simply by the act of creating that recognition in the book. She ensures that the historical record, which had been largely silent on their names and specific roles for way too long, is now, finally, ringing with their achievements. She transitions them from being truly hidden figures into documented, celebrated pioneers.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the spirit of a full analysis, we should probably touch on a critique sometimes leveled at the book. Some readers find parts of it a bit dense, maybe slightly dry at times, particularly when Shetterly is laying the groundwork, focusing on the necessary historical background, the specifics of the Cold War climate, the detailed segregation laws, the institutional structure of NACA and early NASA.
That's fair. I've heard that too. But it raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Is that perceived dryness actually a necessary component of the book's overall goal? I mean, isn't providing that deep historical context absolutely crucial to truly measuring the sheer magnitude of their success against the odds?
I strongly believe it is. It's absolutely necessary. Without Shetterly taking the time to meticulously detail the context of segregation, the depth of the societal pressure cooker they were in, the constant lack of credit, the very real financial disparity. Without that, you, the reader, risk minimizing their achievement. It's like, well, you can't fully grasp the incredible feat of someone climbing Mount Everest unless you understand the altitude, the freezing cold, the lack of oxygen, the immense danger.
Where you need the context to appreciate the accomplishment.
Exactly. That sometimes dense historical context ensures the audience has the right timeline, the right perspective. It allows you to see the profound adversity these African-American women were facing while doing their groundbreaking, life-defining work. It wasn't happening in a vacuum.
So the dry parts are really the foundation upon which the wow moments are built.
I think so. And the book's legacy overall is just incredibly positive and powerful. It's shed this encouraging light on a critical argument about overlooked contributions in STEM. It really stands as a testament, doesn't it, to the fact that sheer brilliance and unwavering resilience can, and often do, triumph over profound systemic barriers, even if it takes the world a generation or more to finally catch up and recognize the truth. Hashtag, tag, 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 out of Radio Row, connecting back, and final thought.
This entire deep dive into Shetterly's work, it really forces us to reconsider how history gets documented in the first place. And maybe more importantly, who gets the power to define what counts as a major scientific achievement versus what gets dismissed as just a minor computational role or support work.
And that brings us to a final thought, something for you, our listeners, to maybe consider building on the material we've explored today. How many other essential but historically overlooked figures might exist in the history of science, technology, engineering, you name it? People whose vital contributions were strategically minimized, perhaps simply by the restrictive or maybe dismissive job title assigned to them.
That's a powerful question.
Yeah. If the title computer was used, intentionally or not, to minimize human brilliance 60 or 70 years ago, what modern, maybe seemingly innocuous titles or roles or even algorithmic processes today might be doing something similar, reducing creative, critical human work to just a function. It's definitely something to mull over, maybe as you navigate your own professional world.
A really provocative thought to end on. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive into Margot Lee Shetterly's Hidden Figures. It's been truly insightful, a journey into mathematical precision, yes, but also into the mechanics of institutional bias and just the undeniable resilience of human brilliance against the odds. Before you head out, please do remember to like this, share it if you found it valuable, and definitely subscribe to the channel Book on a Shelf so you don't miss our future deep dives. And please stay tuned for the next episode where we'll unpack another essential book. We'll see you then.